Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Carl Cross, welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast. It's good to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. Good to see two familiar faces. Looking forward to it.
Great to see you, Carl. Great to see you. Great to see you, Johnny.
Good to see you, bud. Hey, Carl, let's start by giving us a brief explanation of what, hopefully I pronunciate this the right way, Alkami does. Alkami? Alkami.
Yeah.
What Alkami does, what the product does, how it brings value to your customers.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, you won't be the first to muck the name up, but we're a publicly traded SaaS company. We provide a digital banking platform that allows financial institutions to acquire, serve, and grow their customer base. And our target market's about 5,000 financial institutions that span credit unions to commercial banks, regional banks. The only thing excluded is the top 10 mega banks, like the Bank of America's. We don't target them. They build their own gear. And that's really the genesis of the company, is think in terms of just this kind of demographic shift the world's gone through. You've got neobanks and PayPal and Apple Wallet, and you've got all these different ways that money's flowing through the economy. And it's put a lot of our target market into a defensive measure where they don't have the skills and the resources to invest in to build their own innovative technology. And so they need companies like Alkami to bring, highly innovative, differentiated solutions to the marketplace. And that's really for us is kind of our brand in the market. It's been around a long time, highly regulated industry, a very unsophisticated buyer, and we're kind of known as the one that has the most modern tech stack and highly innovative. And so it's been a good run the last couple of years.
How do they do that, though, Carl? How does Alkami do that?
Well, if you think about
give me a use case, like even one use case.
Well, this one, if you've got a young user base, we've got a crypto offering. So if a financial institution wants to provide a platform that allows their members or account holders to trade on the crypto exchange, then we deliver a solution that allows them to do that. We'll do money movement like P2P, real-time payments with FedNow, which is a new payment rail that's coming out. The federal government's behind. So it's all around moving money in real time, right? And so those are probably two of the most basics. And then it's got a heavy AI influence play around data and marketing. So if you think in terms of you as a digital user, 75% of an individual's interaction with their financial institution is through the phone, which shouldn't be a surprise. And so basically moving all the back office functions that have historically sat on-prem, and you're moving them to this, basically a computer in your hand.
Yeah, powerful. Hey, Carl, so you've climbed the ranks of sales leadership. You got a great track record of success. Let's share some lessons you learned along the way. So if we go all the way back to when you were an account executive and you moved up to first line manager, is there something that sticks in your head of what you really had to learn when you became a first line manager?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, it was a pretty quick lesson, right? You learn pretty quickly. It's not about you anymore, right? And I started my career at a company called Peoplesoft, and some of your listeners may not know who that is, but think of the legacy Workday type stack. It was one of the premier ERP vendors. Had a lot of success as an individual contributor. Always wanted to go into leadership. I wanted to build a sales career, and so I knew I was going to have to graduate up through multiple levels of leadership. And I got promoted, and I ended up having to lead the team that I actually reported into. So
that's tough. That's tough when you have to do that.
Really tough. And there was a guy named Jim Dupre that he and I started on the same day at PeopleSoft. Still talk to him to this day. He was kind of the anchor of the team. Had no desire to do anything but be a rep. And second quarter in the seat, head of sales ran a promo and a spiff that had a pretty healthy bonus tied to it that was performance based, and I missed that by about $100,000 in bookings.
Mm.
I over rotated significantly with the team, made it all about me and my bonus. And Jim grabbed me, took me out behind the office. He said, "Dude, you're being a dum dum." He goes, "It's not about you anymore." Right. And so I walked away from that going, damn, he's right. It's not about me. I got to lead, coach, and develop, individuals. And I think that's the big leap, right? I mean, first line's the hardest job in the software business. You're pinched between what the CRO is pushing down. You're pinched between your reps. You're pinched between the customer and the prospect. And it's somewhat of a rite of passage. If you're going to build a career in this industry, you've got to, and some people love that to be their only career, and that's admirable and honorable. But it's a rite of passage in this industry.
Yeah. Now, how about when you went from that first line manager job to the second line manager?
Hey, Johnny, let me just ask a question there that I'm dying to ask, because most companies do not let, I don't know it's not the fox in the hen house. It's they don't let people stay on the same team that they were on to lead that team. And what I found over the years, Carl, is that the majority reason that happens is it's a location, or somebody stays in a location, or they have leverage and they say, I want to stay in, the Southeast or whatever. And that's how they wind up managing. So if you were your boss, what were the pros of putting somebody with the team to lead the team? And what are the cons, and what advice would you give people? Because there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't want to move. So, if you want to make me the leader of this team, then I'll do it. But, talk about the pros and cons of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with the cons. That's an easy one, right? Because, when you're kind of in the tornado, right? When you're an individual contributor, there's a collegial aspect to the team, and, you build this camaraderie, and there's a lot of blame bias that happens, right? Because you're for a lot of different reasons, and so you kind of build that up, and so you kind of have to extract yourself from that. The pro is, I think, which outweighs the con, is there's something there's unique value in understanding how people tick, right? So you really understand kind of the pattern recognition of how they behave. How do they run a deal? How are they going to react to conflict? And so you kind of accelerate through that, right? So you're not learning the personality traits of the people that you're leading and coaching and developing. And for me, that was, it took me 2-3 quarters to really get comfortable. And then I kind of got some wind in the sails, and we had a pretty good run together.
I think the other con, though, is when you come from the same team, you're trying to show everybody why you got promoted. Yeah. And then a lot of times people try to be super salesperson. Let me show you how to sell the deals. And essentially they try to sell the deals for the rest of the team, and it just doesn't scale.
I find that the people sometimes, the reps themselves, try to take advantage and leverage you. Like, come on, Carl, 3 months ago, you weren't doing this either, and now we got to do this. So it's pretty difficult. You have to contemplate it.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, you were one of us one day. What happened to you?
That's right.
Why you're making us do things you didn't have to do. Yeah, exactly. How about when you went to second line?
Yeah, I think the big leap there is and you kind of touched on, John, which I think is what for me was a learning. Number one, you're obviously driving results through leaders, right? And there's something different about that, right? I mean, if you think about what makes a great first line leader, I mean, there's a lot of things that make a great first line leader, but they represent the values of the company, better than anybody. They understand the leading indicators of the business. So they understand all their metrics, like their pipeline. They understand the math equations behind that. They're one of the best at selling the company's offerings, right? So, if you're going to lead, you got to show them that you can do it, then you teach them, and then they got to demonstrate that there's objective evidence that they can do it. And then they're great storytellers, right? And so you have to think in terms of when you're leading first line leaders, those are the things in my mind that make great first line guys, right? Now, the mistake that I see a lot of second line make is what you touched on, which is you'll have a tendency to run around them and go straight to the field like you're a first line manager, and you rip the steering wheel out of their hands. And that just creates, they feel chastised. It creates a sense of animosity. And then the individual contributors actually see that that's happening. And so you devalue that first line leader. And so for me, getting through that, those are all learned skills. It's the thing I've learned is, we've all been very successful, right? I've never moved into a role that was a step up, whether it was a first line, second line, or CRO, where I was qualified for the role. It's about being not qualified for it, but I was prepared for it. And so, it's okay to be uncomfortable, right? And the further you move up the ranks, the lonelier it gets at the top. And so, not just first line to second line, but for me, it's, second line starts to be a little bit more strategic versus tactical. They're thinking in terms of market analysis. How are they aligning the sales strategy with the business goal that they've been handed at the beginning of the year? And so you just have a broader, your aperture opens up and you got a much broader view of the role. And then you got to go have a mission and a vision to where you're enabling the first line leaders to drive results. So
yeah, I think it takes a while, to your point, to get there. But typically what happens is what you first pointed out, where the poor reps are getting asked by the second line manager the same questions that they were asked by the first line manager. And there's no real quote unquote value add to the second line manager yet, until they gain perspective and say, what added value am I going to bring to the table in addition to what the first line manager brings? That's when the epiphany happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a question for you both. What I struggled with as I continue to move up the ladder in managing managers and managing managers, I always kind of felt like my strength was in the field, and my strength was with the troops, and my strength was on deals. And what advice would you give to leaders that are moving up that feel a very strong connection to reps? Johnny, I think you talk about a lot, the higher up you go, the more you're recruiting. And so many of these people I recruited. So it's helping the managers recruit. And it was always difficult for me two things I'd like you to comment on. First is, how do you deal with that for yourself? And secondly, what are some signs that you're doing it? Like, this is a little outrageous, but it's happened to me before. A rep calls you and asks you for an update on the forecast, meaning you went on the call, you didn't do a good job of establishing who's doing what when, and you wound up with the task afterwards. So could you guys kind of comment on that? Like, number one, how do you fight it? And number two, what are some warning signs?
Well, I think the first thing, your leadership team, they've got to understand it's their responsibility to set the performance conditions for the reps. And that's a two-way street, right? There's, as a leader, a first line should wake up every day, and it's their ultimate responsibility that every person on that team has an equal chance of success. And there's a lot of things that we could unpack on that. Now, the corollary to that is, and this will be a familiar term that you guys have heard, the reps have a responsibility because they got to participate in their rescue as well. And so those things, I don't know that I've ever figured out the secret sauce, how you get that flywheel effect going, but I think that's just a continual struggle all the way up, is how do you get the leaders to understand it's your responsibility to create the performance conditions, and then you got to hold the team accountable to it. They got to feel like that you have their best interest as your number one priority, and then they have to be willing to step up to the plate and take a swing. So, what do you think, John?
Yeah, I'm going to just add to what you said, Carl. I think that you actually, if you're the third line manager, you have to actually outline, or the CRO outline, like segregation of duties between first line manager and second line manager. Otherwise, you get the second line manager doing exactly what the first line manager does. When you think about what a first line manager, especially a brand new one, is really not good at, they've never recruited before, right? They've never truly analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of their reps in the sales process to understand what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, and really put their finger on, like, this is what's going right or going wrong with this rep. And then they've never really trained people. So I think the power and the value add comes in the second line manager, where they, one, are responsible for helping the first line manager recruit. Two, they should be in charge of analyzing each and every sales rep for strengths and weaknesses in their skills and their knowledge, and helping to train that first manager to spot that stuff. And then finally, that poor first line manager is doing all this stuff. You got to help them actually train the reps too. It can't just fall. All of this can't fall on the backs of the first line manager.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I mean, like, you really broke our business down to its most fundamental part, and this is going to really make it elementary, but it's really about skills and pipeline. If you got enough pipeline and you got the right skills in the organization, it's pretty hard to have a big miss, right? And it's interesting, as I've thought about my career, particularly as I've moved, second line and beyond, you start to understand there's not a lot of I'm going to be judgmental when I say this. A lot of first line managers have never had the formal training of what does it mean to be a leader, right? Creating that platform of, pipeline building, territory and account reviews, opportunity management, recruiting and retaining talent, forecasting, onboarding, and you got to go teach them, right? And, what are the actions? And you almost have to lay the calendar out for them and give them the tools that empower them, and then have some success measures against it. And then everyone's got to stack hands and be committed to doing that and seeing that through. And then on the skills front, most organizations, if you talk to them and say, hey, look, what's your success profile for, or your key skills and attributes for your high performing reps? Most of them can't answer that question. And so, the second, third line, are you willing to go invest the time, right, to go define that and do the work that looks at it from sales execution to sales knowledge to how they engage with clients if you're in a hunter-farmer model, or, what are the leadership attributes that we're looking for, and building those, that profile so you understand the foundational behaviors, like, having integrity. That's a no-brainer. But then what are the success behaviors from the execution side, and then go recruit to it. Because, the biggest for me, and this happened probably 10, 11 years ago, and the first line team, like when we would, people get hired, they get fired, they get promoted, and they surprise you, right? All of those are going to happen, whether you're a CRO, a third, a second line. But when that would happen, the most leaders will look at it and just point the finger and blame bias, right? That guy just couldn't cut it here.
Right.
You go to the first line manager and you have a discussion with the first line manager that says, okay, look, this is on you, and don't take this the wrong way, but there's only two things that could have happened, right? We either did not recruit to the profile, right? Which is okay. I've made bad hires. Everybody makes bad hires. Or, hey, we recruited to the profile, but you did not invest the time, effort, and energy to lead, coach, and develop, and make sure that they had the right skills and the best opportunity to be successful. And it's only those two things. And when you get a first line leader to connect with that, then the mind starts going, right? And then you start to think through, okay, so now I see how this happens, because you can just do the math and map it out for them that says, okay, let's say the rep carries a $2 million quota. How long does it take to recruit somebody? 6 months. Okay, 6 months. What's the average productivity ramp? 9 to 12 months. All right, now you're a year and a half. So you're $3.5 million behind already before you even have somebody show up at your doorstep. If you make a bad hire, or you don't lead, coach, and develop them properly. And you start to do the math, and that was back to what I was saying about what, the strongest leaders, they know the math equation. But as you move up in senior leadership, it's your job. You got to go create that environment where they understand it, and there's crystal clear clarity on it. The expectations are set, and then you just get all that out of the way, and then it becomes, hey, let's go have some fun and go get after it.
Yeah. But then, on the recruiting part of what you said, then you're not in a hurry to make a mistake, is the way that I like to think about it. They slow the process down, just like slowing down a good sales process, to make sure that they get the right person and the right fit. Because let's face it, 80% of, making that person successful is who you recruited. You can train and develop all you want and lead all you want, but if you recruited the wrong person, you're still in trouble as a leader.
Yes, you are. And that's the hardest thing in this, particularly now, right? With the Great Resignation and trying to find not in play players. And I mean, because you can go find players, right? It's kind of like companies. You can kind of go find companies to buy in this market, but most of them you're not going to want to buy. It's the same thing with reps and even first line leaders. And it's kind of, teaching people how to get through that opaqueness, teaching them how to interview properly, so that when you do make a choice, you make the right choice. So you're not, you're not waking up and you're chasing your sales capacity for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
We're
gonna get to that. I know we're gonna get to that.
I really, really like this conversation because there's an old saying that says people don't leave companies, they leave bosses, they leave managers.
Yeah.
And what you guys are highlighting is, to be honest with yourself, you either recruited the wrong person or you didn't coach and develop them. And both of those are your problem. And it's funny how quickly the worm turns when somebody goes, oh, that person was a crap bird. They were producing and then now all of a sudden they're gone. And then the stories that get created about the individual on the way out is kind of comical. So I just wanted to highlight that. If you're, when you lose somebody, you really need to look in the mirror and ask yourself those two questions. I either didn't recruit right or I didn't coach and develop them.
Yeah, if you're
I hate to be a stickler, but I like to divide those into three, where you recruited, you coach and develop, and then lead. Because you have to be able to lead. You have to be able to motivate people and, find out what motivates them so that you can actually lead them the right way. Because you can try and train and develop people, but if you don't understand like what their hot buttons are and what their goals and aspirations are and motivations and fears and insecurities are, because you don't really know that person, it's really difficult to motivate them as a leader.
Yeah, it's not always necessarily money. Everybody thinks the sales rep's motivated by money. I had a rep, this is going back several years, and of all things, we had a highly technical sale, but we had a guy that was an engineer by trade and highly educated, but he had this gregarious personality and came to me and said, look, I think I want to be a rep. I'm like, man, I don't think you can do it. And so we put him through the gauntlet and we ended up hiring him. He was the number one rep 2 years in a row. And I remember sitting down with him and I'm like, hey, what really drives you? And he goes, it's not money. And I go, what is it? He goes, I want to be proud of the work that I do. And I want to know that my work connects to something that we're trying to achieve here. And I'm like, man, that's fantastic. I'm glad you shared that with me. Now I know how I'm going to get you energized around, the things that we're going to ask you to do.
Love that. How do you guys, what's your comments here as you go up the ranks? Where does the responsibility of the culture come in? At what level? Who owns the culture?
Well, yeah, culture is an interesting thing, right? Most companies just think it's put a few things on the wall and that's our culture. I think, I don't think there's any one owner. I mean, I think ultimately, the ELT owns the responsibility of creating the ceremonies in the company that establish what the culture is, and you can have some guidelines on it, but and you got to get involvement when you're defining that. But ultimately, I think every individual in the company owns it, right? That's a hard thing is, defining it, number one, but then secondly is like, how do you get people to demonstrate the values? And, I don't know that I've been with any organization that's got that 100% right.
The reason why I ask is when I see there are reasons why people leave, and a lot of it has to do with culture. And because companies, like you said, Carl, are not clear on that, on who owns what, as you said, your success profile, it should absolutely be part of the success profile is how does the individual interact in the culture? And when you put it in those kind of terms, it's like culture is very important. But it's amazing how many, Johnny, as you're talking about delegating duties or what have you, like whose role is what in the culture, I think is something to really contemplate. If you're not the owner of it, what are you doing to support the culture? And how do you assess somebody, whether they are part of the culture or not part of the culture. I think that's a big part that companies get wrong, especially when the culture maybe changes over time.
Well,
you can help create a culture as a sales leader, especially if you try to create a culture of meritocracy.
Yep.
But when you do something like that as a leader, you got to live by it. It can't just be a bunch of words. So once you claim like, this is my vision, this is the culture I'd like to have in the company, now you have to live by it. And what happens in a lot of companies is, to Carl's point, they put up different flyers or paintings or something on the walls.
Hashtags.
But they don't truly live by it. Underneath the covers is a lot of stuff that is completely against what they just said was their culture. So what I found as a leader, you have to be really careful about what you say you're going to do and what culture you're going to have, because now you better be ready to live by the positive and negative consequences of that culture.
Oh, you know where that shows up, John? I couldn't agree with you more. We've all missed quarters. I think I'm on my 109th quarter in this business, and
wow.
If anybody tells you to make every quarter, then don't hire them. But when you have a miss, particularly when you get up into more senior leadership, rallying the first line and the second line leadership that says, okay, look, we're going to wake up tomorrow. It's going to be the first day of the next quarter. How you show up in this company is going to matter. You got two choices. You can go grab a bag of hammers, start slinging them at your team, or you can lead out from the front, figure out do the after action review. What did we learn through that? And how is that attached to the values? And man up to some degree, I say that euphemistically, versus, walking around like somebody stole your milkshake, right? So there's all kinds of moments in truth through the life cycle of a company where I agree with John, how you're going to show up and do you live it? And, particularly when it's a merit-based culture, which is, That's the great thing about sales. There's a scoreboard every 90 days.
But a lot of this goes back to your points before, is if you are a leader and you're recruiting the right people and you truly are leading them, and you're coaching and developing so that they're growing and they feel like they're growing as a human being, they're growing in their career, their skill set is increasing. You miss the quarter, they're not leaving you. But if you're only hammering them every quarter in, quarter out, what's the pipeline? What's the forecast? You're not training them. You're not developing. They don't know who they're going to be when they do what you're asking them to do 2 years from now. Where are they going to end up? What are they going to look like? How are they going to feel? If they don't understand that stuff and you miss the quarter and the culture seems to turn, see you later. I'm gone. I could find somebody that's going to go help develop me, develop my skills, my knowledge, increase my capabilities as a human being. Why am I going to stay here? You're not doing that.
Every quarter is a snowflake. No two are the same, right? And when you get that, it's like, man, it's okay. We miss, right? Let's just not make the same mistake twice. All right. Let's go figure out what we're going to do differently to empower our people to not put themselves in that position.
Okay, I love to ask leaders. Sorry about that, Johnny. We'll just wrap this up on the culture piece. I love to ask leaders if they have patriots or mercenaries in their organization. And when I explain that, because that tells me a lot about culture, what Johnny was saying is that the people leave you, they tend to be more mercenaries when there's a blip in compensation, a blip in the stock price, a blip in equity or funding or whatever. And those people are mercenaries. They take their guns and they lay them down and they go somewhere else and pick up a different gun. And the patriots, I like to say, are the ones that, like at the end of the quarter, they're breaking down furniture and, melting, metal to make bullets.
But the question is, did you make them that way because of your culture and your leadership?
Yes.
Were they born that way?
What I mean? Today, I think,
some are
Johnny,
born that way. Some are mercenaries no matter what.
Some are definitely,
but you hire them. But the vast majority, you probably made them that way by the culture you created in your leadership.
Well, there's an old saying, I think, that we can all abide by, is that everybody loves to be led. As long as you can take me to a place I can't get to on my own. Exactly. And I really think that's a strong tenet of leadership. And I think it totally goes in hand with culture. And with today's employee, hypocrisy has never been so strong on the criteria. We either do what we say we're going to do and we believe that what we do matters, or we don't. And because I just think that, most of the employees today, what I hear a lot about is they're just extremely sensitive to hypocrisy. And that if you're not doing what you say you're going to do or what you say you believe in, you're going to have a team of mercenaries.
Yeah.
Well,
So Carl, when you stepped into that lonely job, the CRO job, what was the biggest lesson you had to learn there when you were a man on an island? What happened?
Oh man,
that's lesson. Because it always looks a lot easier from the outside.
Yeah, it's well, it's certainly lonely at the top. I mean, there's for me, and it may be different for others. I think first off, it becomes all about, how are you creating sustainable productivity in the organizations, right? And that's not in quarter execution. You're only going to be so good at executing in quarter, and I'm going to even submit to you on an annual basis, right? At that altitude, if you're doing your job, your metrics, your cohorts, like you've got a pretty good handle of where your gaps are on making the plan. And so it's about how you create and looking more than a year out. But more tactically, I think for me, the shift was just the alignment. I call it working across the seams. How do you think in terms of alignment of the sales and marketing machine with the customer success machine that drives overall predictable revenue growth in the engine? And a lot of that's just being an effective collaborator, communicating vertically and horizontally in the organization, and then making sure that alignment is aligned to the objectives of the company. And that, we can unpack that, but that's the biggest leap, because the board expects you to have, you got to be cognitively aware as a CRO, right? The board, now the board can be your advocate. That's another big learning, right? The board is your advocate, right? They're there for a reason, not just to hire the CEO, but the CRO is the most popular guy usually in the board meeting, right? And so, starting to understand how do you operate at that level with the board? How can you make them an advocate of yourself? And then, the straight dope, man, that's pretty much at that altitude. Like you're walking around with a peer group on the ELT and a CEO that everybody's seen the same movie multiple times. And like, if you're going to try to fake your way around that's not going to turn out very well for you. So it's just, being fully transparent and providing the straight dope. But then you got to be a strategic thinker, right? Cognitively aware, and then think about how does the interlock work across all the functions of the company, right? It's like, it's interesting, John. It's like, hey, when you stepped into that seat, like I've got second, third line guys, and everybody wants to know, hey, I want to be a CRO one day. Tell me what do I need to do to get there? And I'm like, it's not about you making your number. They're like, what do you mean? Like, it is about making my number. I go, no, that's just expected. It's zooming out from that. And I go, it's the stories that you can tell. Like, how do you think about integrating from the customer and the prospect and the market all the way back through sales and marketing into the product function, right? Because sales has the loudest voice in the company. And this is where you see a lot of CROs fail, is those that don't understand how to pull that lever when it's necessary and when not to pull it. Because everyone in a software company is living with the sins of the last CRO that they had experience with. And more times than not, it probably wasn't real pleasant. And so for me, that was kind of all that's kind of bundled up in being effective with your peer group and thinking in terms of longer term, sustainability of the business, and then interlocking all of the functions. Because for me, I mean, John, you've been a multiple time CRO, and if you don't take the lead as a CRO on interlocking the functions, they're not going to do it. They're just not.
No, and they'll stay in their bowling alley.
They will.
Yeah. And what you were basically describing, I think Brian Halligan, CEO of HubSpot, who we had on the podcast, said it best. He said there's 3 types of value that an employee brings: me value, then they can step up and bring, team value, or they're only focused on their team, or can bring enterprise value. And that's what you're talking about, peer group value were the words you used. But you have to learn how it's about the long-term enterprise and how much value you can bring to that. That's really where you have to change your perspective. So, Carl, so we went through all the different ranks, and we talked about, leading and managing, but what did Carl have to learn about Carl? Because you've matured as a human being, like, tremendously, right? So when you think back, what did you have to learn about you?
Oh, man.
Is there one thing that sticks out? What would you have to learn?
Let me give you a little bit about my background. This will kind of set this up, right? It's, first off, I'm an identical twin. And my twin brother does the same thing I do. He's been a multiple time CRO. He's had multiple exits. So we grew up in the industry together, but we grew up in a small town on a farm, and our dad was a Green Beret. And you, as a twin, you're competing for everything at your early age. You're competing academically, athletically. You're competing for your parents' attention. You're competing from, like, as far as you can remember back. Right. And so I kind of always grew up just without the highly competitive spirit. But being from a small town on a farm, my dad was a man of few words. And when we went off to college, we packed up this old beater of a Ford Escort. It was just like this cherry red. It was the only thing we could afford. And I remember shutting the door. My brother and I still talk about this. And we're like, all right, Dad, like, any words of advice? He goes, yeah, it's pretty simple. He goes, keep your effing mouth shut. Keep your head down. Never forget the world owes you nothing. And always make sure your shoes are shined. And I'm like, wow, I'm 19 years old. I'm like, that's not very epiphanal. But as I got older, it turned me into this upside down snob, because I always felt the world was against me. And I'm like, no one's going to outwork me. No one's going to have greater success than me. And I'm just going to have this maniacal focus on that. Right. And that served me well, until I started moving up in more senior leadership roles. And to answer your question, that kind of provides the context. There was a learned skill that I had to have that was absent. And that was, it's like, how do you take authenticity, patience, empathy, and vulnerability, and passion? And I know those things sound really, really soft, but there is so much power in that, where if you authentically connect to and by the way, not just your people in your organization, but people that are peers of yours, learning that skill creates a tremendous flywheel effect on what people are willing to do. They're willing to get on the wall for you. They're willing to understand the mission if you clearly articulate it. They understand the strategy you're trying to execute. And if you connect with people on that level, man, they will run through a wall for you. And it's taken me years to kind of tap into that, right? And knowing when to tap into it. And it's almost like white collar, blue collar, kind of have a white collar mentality, but also have a blue collar mentality. And if you do that, it's going to serve you well.
That is a freaking great story. I love it.
It is.
I absolutely love that. Love it.
And when he says identical twin, Johnny, it's identical.
I've never seen his brother.
These birds look exactly alike. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Now, what do you think you had to learn about other people or people that you were managing? Is there something that you had to learn there? Like, was it to motivate them, to to lead them, to develop them, to coach them? What did you have to learn about other people?
Yeah, look, you don't get a lot of choices every day you get up, right? Just it's human nature. You get really one choice, and that's like your attitude. So that's about the only thing when your feet hit the floor at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. before you go out for a run or a bike ride or whatever you do to get exercise, you make a conscious choice around your attitude. I always tried to wake up with a more optimistic view, to tell you things that I've learned, and I'll get to the coaching and developing. But I think in general, most people have an infectious desire to learn, right? And it's what Kaplan just talked about, right? I think most people wake up, they want to be led. They want to connect to something bigger than themselves, right? They want to be proud of the work that they do, and they want to understand how it matters. And they're looking to be led, coached, and developed. And so That at kind of a basic level is, what I've learned about people. And I do think there is a lot around just the tactical understanding of what motivates somebody. It's back to the example I gave of the individual that was an engineer that ended up being the top rep in the company a couple of years in a row. When you start to learn what's really going to motivate them, and it's not a bad thing if someone says, I'm motivated by money. I actually like those people, but everyone's different. Everybody's a unicorn. And, it's kind of like children. If you have children, you're going to love them the same, but you're going to raise them to what was put between the ears and not what was left out. And it's the same thing when you're leading, a sales organization or a field, organization or go-to-market organization. Like, it's understanding, what are the pawns on the chessboard? How am I going to be strategic about how I'm going to get the most out of them? And then make sure that they feel like they're connected to kind of to the Patriot comment that you made, John. Like, I want to be in the organization. I'd love for them to be mercenaries when they're trying to close a deal, but like being Patriots, he connects back to the company.
Yeah. Man, I love what you said about, I love what you said about the responsibility of that. I think it's really extremely powerful. There's a concept that I call it the wanna factor. And I see leaders that have the wanna factor. And what I mean by that is when I look into an organization, I can see people that wanna do stuff. They're not doing it because they have to. They're not doing it from compliance. They're doing it from conviction. And great leaders, they exude that wanna factor. And I'm reminded, Johnny, when it wasn't you who sent me over to Germany, but when I first got over there, I didn't really know anybody, so I had no wanna factor. And it was at the end of the quarter, and I'm in another country, so you're dealing with the US, and I come out. It was the loneliest feeling I've ever had as a leader. It was the last day of the quarter, and I came out of my office in Frankfurt, Germany, and I almost broke my leg there were no lights on. I'm trying to get the forecast together. I'm trying to get it squared away, and there were no lights on. And it was the most loneliest feeling that I ever had. And then fast forward that a little bit, which is pretty cool, is, same scenario, end of the quarter, and I'm getting calls from other leaders that I'm leading, and they're saying, what do you need? And that, for me, was an epiphany. It's like, do you have the wanna factor? Are people doing things out of compliance, or are they doing things out of conviction? Yes. And I really think, Carl and John, the things that you guys have been talking about really are summed up well in that.
Yeah. Really good, Johnny. Really good. Well, it's, like Carl said, I think we all want an opportunity, and we all want to be part of something that's much bigger than ourselves. So if you hire the right people and you are coaching them and training them and developing them and leading them in the right way, they're going to stay with you because they feel like you're giving them the opportunity to stand on a platform of opportunity in which it's going to grow. And where else are you going to find that? If you have a leader that's allowing you to do that, you're not going to find that in many other places.
No, you don't.
Yeah. So, Carl, now your perspective as a 3-time CRO, what's changed about your perspective on the sales process? Is there anything that you now look at and say, wow, that step or that stage or that element of the sales process is so much more critical than I ever really thought, now that I've had the perspective of a 3-time, CRO?
Yeah, no, it's the last 3 of these I've done, I've had to redefine the sales process, right? There's a reason the job's open, but it's some basic fundamentals, right? It's got to be connected to the customer buying journey, right? That's a no-brainer. But if I break down a sales process, here's what I've learned. Everyone in the field organization wants to focus on the bottom of the funnel. Late stage deals, we're getting close to the win, and trying to pull people out of that. It's like, look, it's back to like, you got to understand, like, and you can show them the math. Hey, we're only going to be so good at in-quarter execution, right? And so you have to start to shift the mindset up into the earlier stages of the sales cycle. And and even further beyond before it's a qualified sales opportunity when you're paired up with the CMO. But if I think about once you're in a qualified sales opportunity, the biggest, and I've gotten my head wrapped around this, and I got tremendous conviction around it and belief. Early stage, when you're doing effective discovery or your first call, that defines everything else that's going to happen. It's the moment when that prospect experiences your brand for the first time as a company. It's the time that they experience the sales team. Are they credible? Do they have the domain expertise? And then the preparation that goes into that is where I put most of my effort, which is, we got to, before we go do a call, like, let's know what are the 20 effective discovery questions that we're going to ask that uncovers the pain, where we can set trap setting questions and start to lead the witness early in the sales cycle. And I don't think you can concentrate on that enough. I mean, we do my last 3 roles. I mean, we focus on that every quarter, doing role plays. We get informed by the customer, the competitive intelligence group. We've got win-loss review. So we're always focusing on how am I going to be much more effective at discovery? Because what you do there, when you start to get the middle of the funnel and you set the decision criteria, if you haven't done the proper work on the front end, you're going to be a me too sometimes, right?
Yeah. So, if you don't do proper discovery, makes it really hard to build a business case that can show true quantifiable value. And it's almost impossible to find a champion. That's where people end up with coaches. They rush through discovery and scoping and doing demos and talking about features and functions, but they don't slow down and do all the work in the discovery process to set the tone for the rest of the sales process. I agree with you 100%.
I think one of the things that Carl said that kind of gets blown over sometimes is, you said it starts with a great understanding of the buyer journey. And I just want to tag onto that a little bit. Like, sometimes I look at sales processes and I can't tell where the customer is. Where am I in the relation to the customer? And even like in exit criteria, I think the greatest companies that do this are the ones that map it all the way down to like CVOs or, customer verifiable outcomes. It's like, okay, what is the customer doing? What does the customer need to be doing for us to move or exit a stage? So I just wanted to highlight that you said that in the beginning, and I think it's big. I don't think everybody does that. And I think there's a lot of sales processes out there that are they're inside out, not outside in.
Oh, without doubt, right? Entrance and exit criteria. You see it all the time. Reps trying to move deals faster to the funnel, and you got to take, you get on these opportunity reviews. And it's like, well, hang on, man, let's just back up for a second. We were at stage 2, and like, here's the outcomes that we want to see from the customer. We haven't met with the EB yet. Let's go back and break this down. But if you really think about it, I mean, if a CRO has done his job on having a enterprise class sales process, you are more efficient in how you marshal the resources in the company. You've got the right content and the right assets at the right point in time at the stage that you're at. And if you get it right, you start to see win rates go up, your ASP starts to grow, you become a heck of a lot more predictable. Like, the worst thing for a CRO is not having predictability, right? Mm-hmm. It's you can have a miss, but like, if you're off by more than 5% either way, like, that's not good, right? And particularly when you're a public company. But that's, for me, is where it starts. It's, early in my career, it's like, it's just more process. We'll go through the motions. But then you start to get people geared around and they start to understand how all this stuff is, interconnected and threaded together. And then they start jamming on it. So,
yeah. And to your point, they not only have all the really good open-ended discovery questions, understanding the use case and the persona, but they also go in with a compelling viewpoint on the customer. They don't just still go in cold. They've done enough homework that they come in with a viewpoint on this is where I really think I can help your company, and here's why, because of the homework that I did. What I like about that is conversation is now already very meaty. The customer can tell you why you're wrong. That's okay, because now you're getting, real hard feedback quantifiable feedback right away. And I think that's really, really powerful. But yeah, they always go sideways in the discovery process, Carl. I agree with you.
And it's hard, right? I get it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little about scaling. Got a little bit of time left. We kind of brushed a little bit over on sales process, even though I wanted to go a little bit deeper on that. But I think you really made your point on that one, which I agree with you 100%. Now, when you're trying to scale a sales force, what are the top lessons you think you learned about trying to scale the sales force?
Well, I mean, look, think about skill, right? Obviously, we talked about skills. You got to be looking at routes to market, because as you scale, there's no money tree behind the boardroom where, there's just limitless dollars, right? And so there's a balance between growing at the expectation, but then for every unit of margin or revenue, are you becoming more efficient at how you're scaling the business? And that's like diversified routes to the market. Are you going to do an inside-outside model? Or are you going hunter farm? All those things. But for me, scaling is really, do you have a sales capacity plan, right? And I'm not talking about we're getting ready to come into a new year. We already know the sales capacity plan. We know what we're hiring to. But the most effective CROs, most every SaaS company is going to have a 3, 4, 5-year plan, right? They're going to have a target operating model. They're going to look at it in 3, 4, 5 years. But how do you go 3, 4 years out and you've built the mental model of how, if I backed up from that, I'll make this up. We're going to be $750 million in recurring revenue in 3 years. Fantastic. How do you back up from there and then take all of those things around, all right, well, what type of skills do I need? How many do I have? How am I going to account for attrition in the sales capacity model? How am I going to drive higher productivity, be more efficient on the margin side? And all that comes together where, because the last thing you want to do is get behind your hiring plan, right? They say the average life of a CRO is 19 months. All the last 3 roles I walked into, that was the problem. They didn't have the plan to know, hey, look, it's okay to staff ahead of growth, but we got to be purposeful on that, but have the plan, hire to it, hold the leadership accountable to it. And that's how I think about scaling it. There's a lot of things in it, but your sales capacity plan and your average productivity per head is probably the biggest driver in that.
Well, and where it all aggregates is up to your level. Nobody else really pays the price as much as a CRO for getting behind in the recruiting plan. Yeah. So if you think about it in simple terms, let's say that your productivity per rep is 1.2 million. So it's 100,000 a month. So you go around the room when you miss a quarter and you ask each one of the first line managers, well, how late were you on recruiting? Oh, I was only a month and a half, or I was only a month. I was only 2 months. Okay. But when you aggregate that all up to the CRO and there's 50 regions, and they're all behind 1 month, 50 times 100,000. How does the CRO possibly make that up? You can't make it up. So that's why you really can never get behind. You got to always try to be ahead, right? And the big killer is also, as you talked about earlier in this podcast, attrition is the real killer, because now, to your point, it's 6 months to find somebody. Productivity ramp time could be 9 months. And by the time they're productive, it's next year sometime. So that's the killer. That's what takes a lot of CROs out of their job. And I'm always amazed. Sorry to just hop up on the what is that?
Soapbox.
But I'm always amazed at how so many CROs just turn the recruiting over to HR and say, here, you do it. Man, you just put your career on the line. Why are they going to stay ahead of the game? Why? What's their motivation? Right. So
here's a quick fix to this. I learned this probably 4 or 5 years ago because I was in a company, we were in high growth mode, and we were going to have to hire like 30 reps, that next year. I started, and then we were on a calendar year, starting in the summer. And every 2 weeks, I had a call, first line leaders and up, and we went through all the open recs, and you get to end a job. But it's, sometimes as a CRO, you're having to work multiple levels down in the business, and a lot of them will look at it and go, I shouldn't have to do that. I should have effective leaders. No, it's human behavior, man. These guys trust but verify everything. But when you start to get ahead of it, it's amazing what interests my boss inspires me. You start putting hydraulic pressure on something and showing that, hey, I'm looking at the metrics and I'm looking at the bit. Like, it's amazing how much people, they get in line. They're like, okay, this must be really important. And then they go through that one time and then they make the connection. It's like, hey, look, you learned something new. Let's not do that again. So,
right. Yeah. Once they know you're measuring it, they're on top of it. Yeah.
And I think the big killer is, you already talked about it earlier in the podcast, is if you don't have a good success profile, people say, got to go hire 30 reps. I mean, it should be very clear what those reps need. What are they going to be doing? How are we going to measure them? What does success look like in action is what I ask people. It's like, okay, this is a success characteristic or whatever. Okay, I say, so how do you measure that? And what does it look like in action? Because it's got to show up in the interview process. And when companies are scaling and they, that this is a crude analogy, sorry, but they say, bad breath is better than no breath. I'm going to get somebody in the role because I'm going to get my butt kicked. They're going to ask me 2 weeks later if I've, got somebody in the role or not. That's the killer to scale. My opinion is bad hiring, because the hiring floodgates are open, and not being cognizant of what that success profile is. It's the kiss of death.
Yeah, sometimes it's you can go slower to go faster, right?
Yeah.
Even in a deal, right? When you're executing deals, sometimes if you're skipping steps, you got to pull the reins back. So.
Well, I think it's what you also said very early in the podcast, Carl, that, it's really building PG, not just for the accounts you want to go after, but for the people you want to go after. Because just because you have a bunch of openings doesn't mean a bunch of A players just happen to be available, right? Yeah. So it's pipeline generation for all your managers in order to hit those goals and to actually stay ahead of those goals. Have people where you can hire them now with January 1 or February 1 starts, right? That's when you really have a machine, is when you already have the people with the offer letters in place and they start a couple months from now. So the minute the opening happens, they're in there day one, right? That's when you have a machine.
And Carl called it, I loved it. We kind of breezed over it. He called it recruiting the not in play players. Mm-hmm. We're not, when you're under pressure like that on scale, you wind up meeting with a lot of people that are looking for a job. And the best leaders I've seen are doing what you guys are talking about and making sure they have a list of not in play players. And those are the greatest friend to a CRO that I could imagine from a people perspective.
Paul Cross, it's wonderful to see you again.
I know, man, it's been too long. Good to see two friendly faces. Love the podcast. Glad I was, it's an honor to join you guys. Hopefully this is going to be something that the listeners learn from, but great to see you. Keep doing good work.
Yeah.
You too, buddy. Keep crushing it.
There are a lot of really good lessons in here. Thanks for really opening up about you and your experiences, because I think there's a lot of really golden nuggets in here that people are going to cherish. So thanks, Carl, and best of luck to you. Yep, and thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.